Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be diving into something might seem a little boring at first,
Okay.
prices.
All right.
But stick with me on this one, because we're going to be talking about how markets can use prices to take advantage of knowledge that's spread out among tons of people
Yeah.
without anyone running the whole show.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
So to help us with this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at
Okay.
an article from 1945 by the economist F.A. Hayek
Right.
called The Use of Knowledge in Society.
Mm-hmm.
It's published in the American Economic Review, and it's a classic piece
Yeah.
that really changes how we think about how economic decisions are made.
Right.
Hayek's argument is that the knowledge we need to make these decisions, it's not like all in one place like in a government agency or a big company's headquarters.
Right.
It's actually spread out among millions of people.
Yeah.
And each person only knows like a tiny piece of the whole picture.
And that's the problem Hayek's getting at. You
Yeah.
know, if this knowledge is so spread out, how can we use it to run an economy? If you try to do it through central planning, where a small group of people tries to gather all this information, it seems like an impossible task.
Okay. Yeah, I could see how that would be a huge problem. So what does Hayek say we should do about it?
Well, Hayek says the answer is in something we often overlook: prices. They actually act like an invisible hand, always sending out information about how much of something there is and how much people want it.
So it's like a giant communication network, but it's not run by anyone.
Exactly.
And this network helps people make decisions, even if they don't know what's happening on the other side of the world.
Right.
So instead of having someone in charge of gathering all this information, the market itself does it automatically through prices.
Exactly. Hayek explains this really well with this example about tin.
Okay.
Let's say there's suddenly not enough tin. Maybe a mine shuts down or something happens to trade routes. Suddenly, tin is harder to get.
Right.
So the price of tin goes up. And that price increase, it's like a signal that spreads throughout the whole economy.
So like anyone using tin to make something is going to see that tin's more expensive now.
Exactly. So maybe manufacturers start looking for other materials. You know, maybe they try to find different metals to use.
Yeah.
Or invent new ways to make things. And people who buy things made with tin, well, they might wait to buy them or find something else that doesn't use tin.
So all these decisions that people make are based on the price of tin.
Right.
And it all starts to change how resources are used.
Exactly. And all this happens without anyone telling people what to do.
That's amazing. So it's like this complicated dance
Yeah.
between how much stuff there is and how much people want it.
Mm-hmm.
And the price of tin is like the music guiding everyone's steps.
It really is.
And even if something unexpected happens,
Mm-hmm.
the market figures out a way to adapt
It does.
without needing any committees or big plans.
It just works. And what's even more amazing is how quickly and efficiently it all happens. The price system. It reacts right away to new information, way faster than any government planning could ever do.
So Hayek is saying that prices are super important, not just for setting how much things cost, but for making sure that everything runs smoothly.
Absolutely.
But I mean,
Right.
markets aren't perfect, right? We see things like markets failing sometimes,
Yeah.
or unfairness and other problems that make it seem like maybe that invisible hand isn't always working so well.
You're right. Hayek wasn't saying that markets are perfect or that they can fix every problem in the world.
Yeah.
He knew that there are times when the government needs to step in.
So it's not like we have to pick one or the other,
Right.
either totally free markets or total government control.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance.
Yeah.
Understanding that both markets and governments have their pros and cons.
Right.
Hayek's argument wasn't just about saying we should never have any government involvement in the economy. It was much more nuanced than that.
That makes more sense. So how did other economists react to Hayek's ideas? Did they agree with him right away, or did they push back?
Well, as you might imagine, it caused a lot of discussion, not just among economists, but in general. But here's the really interesting part. Even some people who usually supported government intervention in the economy, they could see that Hayek's ideas had some truth to them.
Really? Tell me more about that.
Well, for example, there was this Polish economist, Oskar Lange. He actually believed in something called market socialism. He and Hayek had a lot of debates back and forth. And while they didn't agree on everything, Lange did admit that markets are important for sharing information and for making sure that everyone's actions work together.
So even someone who thought the government should be more involved in the economy could still see the value in what Hayek was saying.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Lange. Even people like Leon Trotsky and Abel Lerner, who were both big supporters of socialist ideas. They also said that market systems can be very efficient in some situations, so it seems like seeing the power of prices. And the problems with central planning, it's something that goes beyond whether you're on the left or the right politically.
That's really interesting. It sounds like Hayek's work really touched on something fundamental about how we understand knowledge
Yeah.
and how we make decisions in the economy,
Mhm.
something that even people with very different views could agree on.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why Hayek's ideas are still so relevant today. He wasn't just arguing for a certain economic policy. He was asking big questions about how we make decisions in a world where nobody knows everything. And those are questions that we're still struggling with today.
Okay, so we've talked about the deeper meaning behind Hayek's ideas and how even people who disagreed with him politically could see that some of his points were valid. But before we move on, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, the datum trap. Can you explain a little more about what Hayek meant by that?
Yeah, sure. This is where Hayek really gets specific about what he thinks is wrong with certain economic models. He says that a lot of economists trying to make economics more like a hard science, they end up making a big mistake. They assume that someone has perfect knowledge. They build these models where there's this imaginary person who knows everything about the economy and can make perfect decisions based on that knowledge.
But in reality...
Well, in reality, of course, nobody has perfect knowledge. Information is spread out. It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
And nobody has the whole picture. Hayek calls this the datum trap. It's when economists get so focused on individual pieces of information that they forget those pieces are just part of a much bigger puzzle. They assume that they can just put all the pieces together and understand the whole economy. But Hayek says that this is a completely wrong way of thinking about knowledge and about how economies actually work.
So it's like pretending that everyone has this magic map of the entire economy.
Yeah.
Like a Google Maps that shows you everything happening in real time.
Exactly.
Traffic jams, factory production lines, the whole thing. When really we're all just trying to navigate with our own little local maps, constantly adjusting our plans as we go. And Hayek says that prices are the key to connecting all those individual maps together.
This is really making me think about prices in a whole new way. It's not just about how much something costs. It's about information and coordination and this incredible exchange of knowledge that's happening all around us. I'm glad to hear that. And that leads us to what I think is one of the most important things we can learn from Hayek, which is that complex systems, from economies to ecosystems, they often work best when we let knowledge be spread out and when we use feedback mechanisms like prices to guide our decisions.
All right, let's take a moment to think about everything we've talked about so far.
Okay.
Before we wrap up this deep dive with some final thoughts. Okay, so we've seen that prices can act like powerful signals, helping everyone make decisions and coordinating economic activity in a way that no central planner ever could.
Right.
But let's dig a little deeper into what all of this means.
One of the things that makes Hayek's work so interesting is that he doesn't just focus on how the price system works. He goes further and explores what knowledge itself really is.
Okay, now we're getting into some deep stuff. What exactly does he say about knowledge?
Well, Hayek, along with this philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, they pointed out something really fascinating. They noticed that lots of complex systems, from language to how cultures work, they operate on a level of knowledge that we don't consciously think about.
Wait, knowledge we're not even aware of? How can we use knowledge if we don't even know we have it?
Think of it this way. You use grammar rules all the time when you're talking. But you probably don't stop and think about those rules every time you say something. It's kind of like a hidden knowledge in your brain.
That's true. I don't diagram sentences in my head before I talk.
Exactly. And it's not just language. Think about all the complicated ways we interact with other people. There are all these unwritten rules and social cues that we understand and react to without ever really thinking about them.
Okay, I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So how does this unconscious knowledge connect to markets and prices?
Hayek's point is that the price system is another example of a system that uses this huge amount of unconscious knowledge. Just like you don't need to be a linguist to speak your language, you don't need to be an economist to participate in the market. Prices take all that complex information about supply and demand scarcity and what people want and turn it into a simple signal that everyone can understand, no matter how much they know about economics.
That's mind-blowing when you think about it. Millions of people interacting in this huge economic web, guided by these tiny price signals. And none of us need to completely understand how it all works.
It really is amazing. And it shows you why central planning has limits. No matter how smart the people running a centrally planned economy are, they could never have all the knowledge, both conscious and unconscious, that's in the market itself.
Okay, so Hayek is making a good case for why markets are efficient and can adapt. But let's be real. Markets aren't perfect, right? We see market failures, inequality, and other problems that make you wonder if that invisible hand is really working as well as we think.
You're absolutely right. Hayek wasn't saying that markets are perfect or that they can solve all of society's problems. In fact, he said that there are times when the government does need to get involved.
So it's not like we have to choose one or the other,
Right.
either completely free markets or total government control.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance, understanding that both markets and governments have their strengths and weaknesses. Hayek's argument wasn't as simple as saying that the government should never be involved in the economy. It was much more nuanced than that.
That makes a lot more sense. So how did people react to Hayek's ideas back then? Was his work immediately popular, or did people disagree with him?
Well, you can imagine Hayek's ideas sparked a lot of debate, not just among economists, but also in society as a whole. But this is where things get really interesting, because even some thinkers who were usually in favor of more government intervention in the economy, they actually agreed with some of Hayek's insights.
Okay, now you've got me curious. Tell me more about these people who unexpectedly supported Hayek.
Well, take Oskar Lange, for example. He was a Polish economist who believed in market socialism. He and Hayek had these big debates. And even though they didn't agree on the best way to solve the knowledge problem, Lange admitted that markets are really important for sharing information and for making sure that everybody's actions work together.
So even someone who thought the government should be more involved in the economy could still see the value in what Hayek was saying.
Exactly. And Lange wasn't the only one. Even Leon Trotsky and Abel Lerner, who were both strong supporters of socialist ideas. They also admired how efficient market mechanisms can be in certain situations. This shows that recognizing the power of the price system and the problems with central planning, it goes beyond traditional political ideologies.
That's fascinating. It suggests that Hayek's work really hit on something fundamental about how we understand knowledge and economic coordination, something that resonated even with people who had very different political and economic views.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why Hayek's work is still so important today. He wasn't just arguing for a specific economic policy. He was wrestling with fundamental questions about how we make decisions in a world where nobody knows everything. And those are questions that we're still trying to figure out today.
Okay, so we've delved into the deeper meaning of Hayek's ideas and seen how even those who disagreed with him politically could see the truth in some of his points. But before we finish up this deep dive, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the datum trap. Can you explain a little more about what Hayek meant by that?
Of course. This is where Hayek really gets specific about what he sees as wrong with certain economic models. He argues that many economists trying to make economics more scientific end up falling into a trap of assuming that someone has perfect knowledge. They create these models where they pretend there's one person who knows everything about the economy and can make the absolute best decisions based on that knowledge.
Than in the real world.
Well, in the real world, of course, nobody has perfect knowledge. Information is scattered. It's always changing. Nobody has the full picture. Hayek calls this the datum trap. It's when economists focus too much on individual bits of data and forget that those bits are just small parts of a much bigger and more complex system. They assume they can just put all those bits together and understand the whole economy. But Hayek says this is a completely wrong way to think about knowledge and how economies actually work.
So it's like pretending everyone has this magical map of the entire economy, like some super Google Maps that shows you absolutely everything in real time.
Exactly.
Like traffic jams, what's being produced in factories, the whole shebang.
But in reality, we're all just trying to navigate with our own little local maps, constantly adjusting our route as we go. And Hayek argues that prices are what connect all those individual maps together.
This is really changing how I think about prices. It's not just about how much something costs. It's about information coordination.
Yeah.
This incredible exchange of knowledge that's always happening all around us.
I'm glad to hear that. And this brings us to what I think is one of the most powerful implications of Hayek's work: the realization that complex systems, from economies to ecosystems, often function best when we embrace the fact that knowledge is decentralized, and when we use feedback mechanisms like prices to help us make decisions.
All right, let's pause here for a second and gather our thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive with some final reflections. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in our look at Hayek's The Use of Knowledge in Society.
Yeah, we've talked about how knowledge is spread out throughout society.
Right, and how prices act as these amazing signals that help coordinate everything in a way that central planning just couldn't do.
And we touched on that idea of unconscious knowledge. This stuff we use without even realizing it, and
Yeah.
how markets use that knowledge so effectively. It's kind of awe-inspiring.
Definitely. And we've also seen how Hayek's ideas shook things up back in his day. They caused a lot of debate, but even people who disagreed with him on some things could see that he had a point.
He really did.
But before we wrap things up, I want to bring it back to you, this listener.
Because this isn't just about some abstract economic theory.
Right.
Hayek's work really helps us understand the world around us.
Remember those invisible systems we were talking about? The ones that work based on knowledge we don't even know we have?
Yeah.
Like the algorithms that decide what we see on social media?
Right.
Or the financial markets that set interest rates? Or even the complex ecosystems that make life on Earth possible?
All of those systems use huge amounts of data and feedback loops to make decisions without anyone being in total control.
And just like the price system,
Uh-huh.
they can be surprisingly smart.
Yeah, they can adapt and evolve in ways that we as individuals don't always understand.
Hayek's work gives us a way to make sense of all this, to see the power of decentralized knowledge and the problems of trying to control everything from the top down.
So as you go about your day, try to notice those invisible systems at work.
Yeah, pay attention to how information flows and how decisions are made, not just in economics, but in all parts of your life.
Ask yourself what knowledge is being used here.
Yeah.
Who's responding to signals and making adjustments? And what are the unexpected consequences, both good and bad, that come from these interactions?
Because the more we understand these complex systems,
Mhm.
the better we can navigate them.
And the better we can contribute to a world that's more resilient, more adaptable, and ultimately more prosperous.
And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into the surprising power of prices.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring this with us, and that it's made you curious to learn even more about the hidden forces that shape our world.
Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.